Okay, good evening to you folks. How you doing tonight?
I'm cold.
You're cold, okay. Last week, we had a very good turnout, excellent program. This week, we intend to have the same. One thing I forgot to do this week was to send out a reminder to you that we had this program tonight. It looks like I'm forgiven for having to set that, not sending that message out. But welcome again. My name is Vince Drenovich. I'm with the Men of St. Thomas, and we are tonight to have several presentations. And the first thing I want to do is to introduce some people that should be here. Where is Wendell? Wendell is our chair of this committee, and he is with us tonight. We have some special people in the back with Bill Strasburger, who is taking attendance, and we look forward to tonight's session. We are recording this session as we have done in the past. I've been working on the recordings, about ready to release them via the YouTube presentations, and they will be on the St. Thomas website. So you'll have access to these recordings. Okay, we'll get started. Tonight, we are going to be looking at a guide to your essential planning, and the person who's going to give this presentation is Kay Burry. You can read the information here. She's an Illinoisan by birth, but she's been in Indiana for much of her life. 4 living children, 13 grandchildren, and 16 great-grandchildren. How about that? Isn't that an accomplishment? She's been with the funeral industry, Solar Baker, for 36 years, and she is a licensed pre-need counselor and also the organist when they need one. So isn't that nice? She led her into this career because she's a people person, and you'll find that out very quickly after she gets started. Now, I'm going to let her take over from this and tell her a little bit more about herself. Here's her business card. It's on the bottom of the handouts. Everybody has a handout for the day, so you should have that information. Okay, with that, I'm going to call Kay forward, and let's give Kay a very warm welcome. Kay Burry. Okay, you have that on. It's on. I think it's, or is it a standby? Green. It's green.
It's green now.
All right, you want to test? Can you hear Kay?
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. Okay. So is this gonna remain here?
It'll remain there. It won't bother you if you want.
Okay, well,
And all you have to do is do what you want to do, and
okay.
I'll take care of everything else.
So I've got these handouts if you want to kind of.
Okay.
There we go. I don't want to drop this.
No, don't.
Okay. Okay, so if that looks familiar, that's what I had emailed to Vince and Wendell. So that it's the 4 steps of planning ahead. And I'm going to keep this informal because I think we feel a little bit more comfortable if we feel like we're talking one-on-one. You can stop me if you have a question. If I have the answer, I'll tell you. If I don't have the answer, I'll tell you. Okay? And I did tell you about just about all there is about me. You know, I just work all the time, and I do have a big family, though. Yeah, I do have. So, and they just keep coming. Anyway, so all of you got your guide to planning, to essential planning, and I know that the meetings that you've already had are associated with end of life, things that need to be taken care of ahead of time to make it easier on your family, but it makes it easier on you because it gives you that peace of mind that, okay, we did our will, we did our power of attorney, we did this, and you've done your funeral planning. There's no way we're not going to have some kind of a disposition of our body unless Jesus comes again. That's the only way that we're, so it doesn't matter the age. You read the paper, the young people. So you're never too young to do your pre-planning. You're not too old to do it, but there is a time when it's too late to pre-plan. Okay, and we all know what that is. Okay, so when you open it up, the plans you make for today are for your families tomorrow. So that means, again, that you're continuing on in the process of your end of life planning. So Solar Baker, I think probably all of you are familiar with Solar Baker. We try to get out into the community as well as all the other funeral homes to, make ourselves known and not make you feel uncomfortable when you come to the funeral home, because that's not the happiest place on earth, as we all know. But we're a good place when you need us. So when you open it up, are you prepared? So how many of you, I know some of you have already met with me. I don't know how many of you have met with other people, but how many of you have actually done your funeral pre-planning? Okay. So a few of you. It's an easy thing to put on the back burner, and we'll talk about it next week, or we'll talk about it next month. But I'm glad to see so many people here tonight, because it's going to open up your mind to thinking about, we hadn't talked about that. Think you want that? So if you haven't talked about it, your family doesn't know what you want or how you want things done. So you want to do it your way, but you want to do it in a way that the family is also at peace with that. Okay. So now it says in here, would you know the answer to 125 questions and decisions that need to be made? To me, that's kind of a stretch on the number of things, because a lot of these you don't have to do it on the day of the death. But if you've planned ahead, a lot of these things are already taken care of. So you just make it easier for your family, whether it's your spouse or whether it's your children, whether you have a family or whether you're a single individual. Everybody needs to get it done, because the single individual has to have somebody in charge, not a family member. So he's got to have somebody in charge, he or she. If you are a family, not all families get along 100% of the time. And then you go a step further and you have blended families. And that's when you can have some issues, because if there are children from both spouses, the one spouse dies, the children of that spouse, the deceased, think they are in charge, and they are not in charge. The spouse is in charge. So that's another problem that you can eliminate if you've got your plans made ahead of time. Kids, it might be their mom or their dad, but the new spouse is the one in charge. And it's hard enough emotionally when you lose somebody. And then if you have to go through, disagreements and hurt feelings, that's just not good, when you can avoid that by taking care of it yourselves. Okay. So it gives you peace of mind. When you are emotionally upset at the time of the death, you don't think clearly. I mean, we have to have all this information for a death certificate, clear down to date and place of birth, Social Security. You have to give your Social Security to us. We are the last line of defense when it comes to Social Security. So I know we've always been taught, don't give that number out and but funeral homes have to have that Social Security. So just so y'all know, that's one thing, that if people fill out their information, biographical sheets prior to, they'll leave that blank almost every time, and let's, we got to have it, because we automatically notify Social Security when there's a death, but it becomes more important if it's a death of someone who is actually drawing Social Security. I don't know how familiar you are, but the check you receive in the month of May was for the month of April. So you have to live that whole month before you get that check, or that check goes back. And I have a perfect example. My next door neighbor died on January 31st this year at 9:30 p.m. And for 2.5 hours more, his check wouldn't have had to be returned. But his check that came that next week, or whenever his checks would come, that went back to Social Security. So if you're gonna die, make it the first couple or 3 days of the month so that you don't have to give that money back to the government. So, but a lot of people don't understand that it's, a month in arrears, and you have to live the whole month. And so, as my neighbor found out, the money went back. So sometimes when people are counting on that Social Security check, that's a little rough. I think it ought to be prorated, but I don't have anything to do with the government. So, as we all know. So at the time of need, can be a pretty great financial expense. And when you pre-plan, that's one part of it. But if you actually prepay your funeral, that completes it. Lots of benefits to pre-planning and prepaying. You can't do this with other businesses, like you can't go to a car dealer and buy a new truck or car, or order it. Now I want next year's model and I'm going to pay you today, but you let me know when the new ones come in and I'll come and pick up my new vehicle. Well, they're not going to do it at that price, okay? But the funeral, you pay for it at today's price, and it's guaranteed. In Indiana, in many states, when you prepay your funeral, it becomes an irrevocable funeral trust, which means that money is there for your funeral only, period. It's trusted, so you're not a quote owner. Many people that I talk to are unfortunately having to go through a spend down to get on Medicaid. Medicaid is a crazy thing, and it's very confusing, and nobody understands it fully. I do not believe there's a person on earth who understands the Medicaid program in its entirety. But basically, you have to get rid of all your assets down to $2,000 for an individual, and it's not quite double, I don't think, for a couple. But so if you have a life insurance policy, that's an asset. That's considered money in your pocket. So if it's got a cash value of more than $2,000, you're not going to qualify for Medicaid. That's one disqualification right there. So then it comes time, you either have to cash it in or change ownership to the funeral home. A lot of insurance companies don't want to have a funeral home be the owner of an insurance policy. So you have that to face. Also, if you use your life insurance, which used to be that's the way you paid for your funeral expenses, was with a life insurance policy. So everybody thought they had to have a life insurance policy. That's not why you buy a life insurance policy. That life insurance policy is to leave money for your survivors, for them to be able to continue living and not having a financial crisis. Nowadays, you prepay your funeral through the funeral home. There are some people out there who are selling burial expense. They're not a funeral home. Don't get involved with that, because those people do not know what a funeral costs. They don't have the answers to your questions of what's required. They're just selling you a burial expense policy for whatever amount, 10,000, 15,000, to be used towards your funeral expenses. That gains you nothing, because insurance, the cost of the funeral continues to go up with, every year. If you use life insurance, it's not a guaranteed cost. If you actually set it up and pay for it through the funeral home, then it's guaranteed. The way it's guaranteed is in Indiana and many states, we have to use a third party. So the funeral home is not operating with your money. We have no access to your money for those prepaid funerals. A lot of people have mistakenly thought that, sometimes a funeral home is doing their day-to-day business with your money. We're not. We have no access to it till we file a claim to be paid once we've done a funeral service. So the money is invested. So funeral homes count on that investment to grow to keep up with inflation. However, that's not always the end result. You are not at risk. The funeral home is at risk. If it doesn't grow enough to cover, we have to back our price down to what's available in that trust. Okay? Now, if it works the opposite way, where it grows more than what your funeral cost does, or you make changes to what your plans were for whatever reason. Maybe you wanted a visitation the night before and the service the next day, the mass at the church or whatever. And then at the time of the death, if you live to be 120, really. But at that time, you may decide, or your family may decide, we probably don't need that night before. If you've paid for it, that money is returned to your family. You do not lose your money. Okay? A lot of people don't understand that either. If you're on Medicaid, however, if there's any money left over, Medicaid gets it. The family doesn't. So that's why you want to get all your eggs in the basket. Yes.
Is this an Indiana specific law? Because I know my parents died, they pre-planned, and there were certain expenses that were not covered. They were days.
Okay.
We had
Yeah, his question was, is that an Indiana law? It's a law quite a few places. What is 100% guaranteed is anything with the funeral home. But as you all know, there are other businesses, entities that are involved in a funeral, such as the newspaper, the one that we have. That's another story. But their obits, they now charge by the space that it takes up. It uses the inches, the lines. So we don't know the exact cost of that obit until we actually submit it at the time of death. Right now, most run right around $300 for one time in the Journal Courier. It could be less, it could be more if it's somebody who's been associated with Purdue and you've got lots of things that you've published or lots of things that you've accomplished and you want that in your obit, then it's going to run more than $300. If you have a whole quiver full of grandkids and great grandkids like I do, they're probably not going to be named one by one. There's this many grand and this many great, just, but that's called a cash advance. Anything that's not a funeral home charge, but it's part of a funeral, those are called cash advances. We include them on this prepaid funeral for your convenience, okay? But we can't guarantee because we have no control over what the newspaper's going to charge. Spray of flowers that's on the casket and goes to the cemetery, death certificates, opening, closing at the cemetery. All those things are part of a funeral, but they're not a funeral home expense. So if you have included those in your prepaid funeral, they are not 100% guaranteed, but they are guaranteed to a point. It's going to cost you less if they've been included than if you didn't include them. Such as, and I use it for simple math, so for you mathematicians who are in here, just bear with me, I'm a simpleton. So let's just say the whole funeral was $10,000 and those cash advances were $1,000 of the whole funeral. That's 10%. The maximum that a family could be charged in that case would be $100. So you still are ahead by including all those things. Does that make it clear?
Lost me at the maximum.
The what?
You lost me at the maximum, but yeah.
Oh, what? So you've got funeral home goods and services, and then you have cash advances. Cash advances are expenses that are not funeral home, but they're funeral. So whatever percentage of the whole that those cash advances are, that same percentage, we can only charge that same percentage more on those cash advances. Yeah. So they're guaranteed, but they're not 100% guaranteed. But everything with the funeral home is 100% guaranteed. Everything. Okay? Answer your question? Any other questions? Yes.
Not that this would be the case with solar makers, but let's say there was, small funeral home paid in advance. I've heard of this happening. They paid in advance and the funeral home went out of business. What happens to the and at the time, it was unclear as to what exactly happened with prepaid funerals and stuff like that.
In Indiana, and not all states, but many states have a fund to cover that. In Indiana, it's called the Consumer Protection Fund. And there's always a scoundrel. No matter what the profession is, you're going to find a few people who think they're above the law and they can do things their way. It happens less frequently now because, first of all, funeral homes are very, very regulated in what we are allowed to do, required to do. So in the case of a funeral home going out of business, whether it just closes up or it goes under, the state of Indiana protects you with that Consumer Protection Fund. Periodically, not often, but periodically, funeral homes have to pay for each pre-arrangement that has been prepaid. We have to pay a certain amount depending on the cost of the funeral. This to this is this many dollars, this to this is this many dollars. We have to do that when the account gets, I forget how many millions they keep in this Consumer Protection Fund account, but it's in the millions to cover those businesses who didn't handle the prepaid funeral correctly. They tried to do it their way and then they're gone. So that is paid to any funeral home that the family chooses. Okay. Now it's the same way the cash advances are handled a little bit differently than the funeral expense itself. So we haven't had to pay into it for a while because I think the bad guys have kind of been weeded out over the years. But there were a couple of incidences not too far from Lafayette. The fellow, it was a small town, and so it was a handshake, yeah, I'll do your funeral. Well, he didn't really invest that money properly. And when the person died, well, they don't have anything prepaid. Well, he got some free room and board for a while. The successor funeral home owner came in and he did everything according to Hoyle. He was writing up the papers with a pre-need company, which is what they're called, who has your money. He was doing it perfectly, everything. However, all of a sudden, there seemed to be a lot of deaths in this small town. And the pre-need company is the one who said, this is really strange. When they checked into it, he filed death claims, but the people hadn't died. He had a gambling problem and he needed cash flow. And so he did everything legally, except he claimed they were dead before they died. So he got some free room and board for a while. I don't know whether he's still enjoying that or not. I don't know. But anyway, it's funeral homes are just really, really regulated. And I like that idea. I like the idea that we don't have your money. I like that idea. We can't get access to it.
So we are
Is there
protected.
I'm sorry?
We are protected if we pay.
Absolutely, you're protected. Yes, yes. And the way the money can grow without being taxed is something going on up here?
Yeah, don't worry about
Oh, I was gonna say, did I mess something up?
it. No, we're in good shape.
Okay. The way a funeral home can afford to have a person pay today's price for tomorrow's expense, the money is invested. The only way that I can think of or heard of that you can invest money in the United States and not have to pay taxes on it is through an insurance policy. So these pre-need companies have a type of an insurance product that, we go through the steps, you get a quote policy certificate. That's not the focal point. The focus is you have an irrevocable funeral trust. That means it's prepaid. You cannot cash in an irrevocable trust. You can't take a loan on it. So the insurance industry and the pre-need industry kind of overlap. So in order for the money to grow legally, you don't pay taxes on it. The company that we use invests that money. The funeral home counts on the growth of that investment to cover inflation. And as I explained earlier, if it doesn't grow enough, we have to back our price down to meet what there is. If it grows too much, you get the excess money back. You don't lose. So if the funeral home lost too much money too often, funeral homes wouldn't be able to offer a plan like this to the public. So don't dwell on the fact that, well, we bought an insurance policy. You didn't buy an insurance policy. You bought an irrevocable funeral trust. The money is just invested in that type of an investment so that it's going to grow and you don't have to be taxed. Let's see, Bill. Where's Bill? Where's Bill?
Strasburg, way back there.
Oh, yeah, I'm looking right at you. Yeah, he was a banker, so he know in the trust department. So he knows that families would get a 1099 every year for the growth on their funeral trust. They had to pay taxes on it. So when pre-need companies came along and they set it up through a type of an insurance product, that way you don't have to pay taxes. Insurance death benefits. If you have a life insurance policy, you're the beneficiary. You don't pay any taxes on that life insurance. So this is a legal way to do it. So, but the main point is you purchased an irrevocable funeral trust. Yes.
Okay, my wife and I plan to have our funeral here in Lafayette.
Mhm.
But we're still very healthy. Our children live elsewhere.
Mhm.
What if we buy a policy and I don't know what's going to happen in 20 years,
Mhm.
whatever,
Mhm.
and then we want to be buried in Arizona, or we want to be buried in Kentucky?
It's
What-
transferable.
It is transferable.
Yeah, and sometimes families will choose to transfer it prior to their death. Other times they don't transfer it, but when the death happens, they call us and we make a contact in the area where the death occurred. And otherwise, if someone is prepaid someplace and they now live elsewhere and the death occurs elsewhere, a family will just call a funeral home there. That's not the best idea because it's probably going to end up costing you more money. Funeral homes kind of have a trade, for instance, if you moved there, but you were going to still be buried here, the family would call us, we would make contact with the funeral home, wherever the location is, and we would ask them to make the removal for us, do the embalming for us, prep work, and then arrange to get the body to the airport for transport back to Lafayette. But if you've moved away, not to come back here for burial or anything, then you still need to call the funeral home where it's been planned and paid, because otherwise it's probably going to end up costing the family a little bit more money. But they are transferable, transportable. Most funeral homes don't turn away business. So if you transfer within the state of Indiana, if you come to me and say, well, we did this when we lived in this town, or even we did it with another local funeral home, but we've changed our minds on that, we want to use your funeral home. Whatever you purchase there, we may not carry the same merchandise, but it would be a comparable. If it's an 18 gauge steel casket, then you would have the opportunity to choose an 18 gauge casket of that's comparable price. Okay. I just lost my train of thought. Oh, old age is not fun. Anyway. Okay. Back to your question. Transfer, yeah. So you don't have to make that transfer ahead of time, but it can be done anywhere else. Just call the funeral home where you've actually set it up, and they make that call.
I knew that was the case, Kay, and I want to thank you because we had a parishioner that was here that was he was completely invalid, and she had a policy in California, and you helped us transfer the policy here and handle all that. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah. I think I kind of remember where I was headed on that. So in Indiana, if a person is transferring from a funeral home in Indiana to another funeral home in Indiana, by law, we have to, if we accept it, we have to accept it for what is in that. We can't add charges to the funeral home costs. Okay. If it's out of state and they transfer to Indiana, it can be changed because it all depends on what you're wanting. New York and California are expensive locations to live, to die. And so then you come to, little Indiana, and, we're Midwest living and everything. So to transfer something from one place to another there, that may create a little extra cost, but you have that option to choose whoever you want to. Okay. Yes.
Probably every day I get a call from somebody named Senior Benefits who tell me that a new law has been passed this is before I hang up on them. A new law has been passed in Indiana that will help seniors with funeral costs. And then I hang up. But then I thought, well, gotta ask you, has there been a new law been passed?
Not that I'm aware of. It's kind of like, I think a lot of people get confused on your Medicare health benefits. Who hasn't been confused on that? Now they're really pushing the Advantage plan, that you don't pay premiums, you don't pay office calls. I mean, everything's free. You get your glasses, but if you have something major, boom, you pay every penny of that. You're not covered. So a lot of people get misled by that. Oh, I don't have to pay any premiums, and I get my new glasses every year, new hearing aids. Be careful on the Advantage plans. So I don't know whether any of you have, come across something like that, or if you've been confused when you have to renew every year, but that's something that you definitely want to talk to a reputable insurance agent on that. Yes.
On the, curious, so let's say, the transfer, the cost of transportation, that would be covered under the discretionary fund. I mean, because that's not included in the price you pay for the policy.
Right.
So that would be one of the extra costs.
Yes.
So,
yes. Because a lot of times, we have people who live here most of the time, but they go to Florida for 3 or 4 months, and winter time. And if their death occurs down there, and if people do that, a lot of times they will put in an extra amount to cover in case it does happen when they're in Florida or wherever. And then if they're here when the death occurs, well, that money is there. The family can, we refund it, or they can use it up in other things that may not have been covered or something. Yeah. So you try not to involve two funeral homes. I have a situation, well, they're friends of mine that they completed theirs yesterday, finally, after many years. But their cemetery is not here, but they've lived here for 50 years. And so they feel bad that they're not using the funeral home in their hometown. But they said, we've been here for 50 plus years. Our home is here, and our family will come here anyway, but our friends from down there are not going to drive to Lafayette. And so we're just going to have you do the funeral and the burial and everything, because we would gladly do the funeral, and then the other funeral home could come and get the body. But then you're going to pay lots of extra fees, because a funeral home is going to have a minimum professional services charges plus transportation and all that. So try to deal with one funeral home other than when it's a ship out, to get back to the local funeral home. So, other questions? Yes.
I had one just came up. We had a sister of my husband's who passed away, and she was very good about people and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't find any funeral, which I was shocked, because I thought surely she did that. And
Uh-huh.
she planned everything, every party, every something. So we couldn't find any people funeral. So how do you tell your family or your children, or in her case, I guess maybe at least how do you tell them that you can't funeral? Is that just paperwork?
Well, it's good to have that communication. Let somebody know. She what?
She didn't communicate it.
Yeah, and that's sad, because for the survivors, you're left with, now what do we do? What did she want? Did she ever talk to you about what her plans might be? A lot of times people say, well, it's in my will. A lot of times wills are not read till too late for a funeral or something. So if you've got a funeral plan, you don't want to put it in a safe deposit box and with your will and things, because it'll be too late. You can't get those boxes open without some special red tape. But yeah, so people are getting more communicative, I think, in talking about death and dying, and we're having more programs like this. Time's up.
No,
Oh,
no.
okay.
I just want to make a comment that when we talked about having these templates for purposes of putting your information, there are places in that template where you put that information, and then your heirs or whoever's going to be taking care of that gets that information almost immediately after you pass it. So that's one way to get that information. And that's one of the reasons for having a template, because they ask all of those questions.
Yeah, but most of the time, families know, children don't want to talk about mom and dad's demise. They just don't want to talk about it. But you need to say, okay, you're better off most of the time to do it and then tell them you've done it, because otherwise they'll just, no, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to hear about it. Nothing. Okay. So your spouse, do it, and then you tell your children, okay, we did something for you today. It's the most loving gift we could do for you. You may not want to talk about it now, but funerals are prepaid, da 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 da. So when it happens, you just call this particular funeral home, and they will have the papers and move on from there. One funny thing is when I had my monument put on my cemetery space, my son is the only one who had a reaction to it. He said, Mom, You want that out there so people know how old you are before you die? So, yes,
We have, lots we inherited,
hmm
we live here, buried here.
hmm
How will that?
Well, if you're not going to use those cemetery spaces, do you? Oh, you will. I thought you said you'd be buried here.
No,
Oh, you would be buried there.
we will. No, did I say, no, we will not be buried here. Deal with it.
Will you have a funeral here? Okay, okay,
We will be buried.
okay. So an out of state, if you're not going to have a service or anything there, usually we have to just contact a funeral director, which is ridiculous, but we have to contact a funeral director and see if they will just meet us at the cemetery from that particular state. You know, so Ohio's next to us, Illinois. Some funeral directors have dual licenses. Our funeral directors don't. So when we have a burial going to Illinois, we'll do everything, and then he goes with us to Illinois because he's duly licensed. But the law says that in most states, not all of them are real adamant about it, but we always try to find out and do the right thing. And it usually does, you know, you might give that funeral director $100 or something for just being in attendance, but you don't want to have a service there because then you're going to start all over with all, yeah, but I mean, you have the funeral here, but then you have the burial someplace else. If you said, well, we're going to, you know, have a short service there, well, then you'd have to have a funeral home there, and that's going to cost a lot more money. But if it's just a funeral director in attendance at the cemetery,
Well, we will have a priest.
yes, 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 that would be fine. So we would make all those arrangements with the priest there, unless the priest here wanted to take a trip. So, but yes,
We can deal with there and all.
not really, wouldn't have to.
Transported there
Uh-huh.
and we.
Mhm.
In the cemetery.
What was that?
You can make arrangements to the cemetery.
We would call the cemetery, arrange for the grave to be opened. Is that what you're asking? Yes. We would do all of that. Yeah. Mhm. Or we would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it be a good idea to contact the parish ahead of time?
It's not a bad idea.
But you know, priests get moved around in some frequency.
I was going to say, you don't always know if somebody's going to be there when. Yeah. So, but we help. We help a family with everything that we can possibly help a family with, whether it be, you know, contacting the cemetery, contacting the priest, make sure the priest is available, the grave is open when we get there, all of those things. Now, the only thing that I don't know how far into Ohio, it would depend on the distance. If it's clear over by Pennsylvania, state line. Okay, yeah, so what would happen is probably we would have the service mass that day, depending on the time of the year, whether we go on over there that day or whether we wait and arrive at the cemetery at a set time that next day for the burial. But we make all those arrangements at the time, whatever's convenient for the family, convenient for the cemetery, the priests, everything. Yeah. We just try to honor a family's requests, their wishes, as much as we can, as long as it's legal.
But you want to know that so we can plan extra for.
Right. Yes.
So for the services that you're describing, a person doesn't need to purchase the
revocable insurance trust, right? I mean, you would provide that service if they didn't have the trust and they came to you.
We could, yes, but it would be what the cost is at that time, not now. So, yeah.
Could we move on to the cremation component, talking about that?
Okay, yeah, because questions don't ever end. So when I need to stop, tell me. Cremation, yes, we have our own crematory in town. It's just right out behind our Lafayette location. So you're in our care from the time of the death when we make the removal until the cremains are buried. I know the Catholic wants them buried. Not all churches require that the cremains are buried. Family will keep them, they'll scatter them, whatever. So, but yeah, cremation, there's a few requirements. We have to wait at least 48 hours from the time of death until we can actually start the cremation process. That's the law. Why that's the law, I don't know, other than the fact I look at it, it's not like TV. You can't rewind it and put it all back together. So if it's a suspicious death, an unexpected death, 48 hours gives the family time to cope with it, or if it's suspicious, maybe the law gets involved with it. But we have to wait at least 48 hours before we can start. Did I go too far, too long?
No.
Okay. So cremation, a lot of people do more than just die and be cremated. There's such a thing as a memorial service, which means there's not a body there. The cremains may or may not be there at the time. And again, I think you require the cremains at the time, right?
Well.
And I know St. Tom's is a little bit different.
I'm gonna say, but yeah, it is more important that the cremains be respected.
Yes,
And they can be there, they cannot be there.
yes, okay, but they have to be buried.
They have to be there.
Yes. Okay. So anyway, a lot of times people don't with cremation, a lot of people don't do a service right away. They may wait for a convenient time for all of the family. Am I looking at that? Oh.
We ran into technical difficulty.
Oh, I'm sorry. I hope I didn't cause it. Okay. Thank you. That doesn't mind. So cremation, direct cremation. Can you hear me? Okay. Direct cremation is you live, you die, we wait 48 hours, you're cremated. That's it. That's direct cremation. There's no mass, no burial, no nothing. But that wouldn't be what you people are interested in because you have to bury your cremains, right? Okay, so then there's such a thing as cremation with memorial service, which means there's not a body, but you have that memorial service, memorial mass with or without the cremains. Then there's such a thing as a traditional cremation. A lot of families, not everybody is not everybody agrees to cremation or to burial. You've got both sides. So a lot of times a family will have a viewing, a service, and then the cremation. And then that next day or 2 days later, then they have the cremains buried, if with or without the mass or not. So when people call me and say, oh, I just want a cremation, they may want more than just a direct cremation. So one thing that I didn't touch on is cremation does not require embalming unless there is going to be viewing of the body. For burial, if the casket is not open, once we make the removal from the place of death, there is no viewing unless we embalm. So you can have a regular funeral with the casket closed and not have embalming, if you so choose. So a lot of people get confused on that. They think you have to have embalming no matter what. So, but cremation, no, unless you're having a viewing. Okay? Yes.
But I think you told us that the family wants to delay the service, like during COVID, a lot,
Mhm.
that you would keep the remains
Mhm.
until we had a service.
Mhm.
And I think you said you would charge anything,
No.
which I thought that was really good.
Yeah, we don't, we just don't want families to forget we've got them. Unfortunately, it's really sad, but when we moved from our location downtown to now the new downtown on the south end of Lafayette, it was amazing the cremains that we had stored. I mean, decades, yes. And so we now can or have to keep them so long a time. And then if they're not claimed, and we're talking quite a while, but anyway, then periodically we will dispose of the cremains legally.
I don't imagine this is available here, but I've been reading about chemical cremations. So what is that? What's the logic behind that?
Well, I don't know what the logic is, but there are so many new concepts coming into play. Are you talking about um, aquatic,
Yes.
the hydro? Yeah, that's illegal in Indiana. So not too many states have it legalized. Not many funeral homes are going to offer that because the equipment is outrageously priced. A crematory is very expensive, but when you do something like that, we had a family recently that out west, there is, they call it recompose. And it's a body is shipped out there, which we did. We had to pack the body in ice in a container, and it arrived out in Oregon, Washington. Then it's going to decay naturally in dirt. And then if a family doesn't want that dirt back, they haul that dirt to a mountain out there. If the family wants the dirt back, which this family did, and the cremains, within the compost, then they have to pay for shipping the dirt back. And the plan is they're going to have the neighbor plant a tree with that. So there's all kinds of strange natural burial, green burial. A lot of people talk about that. There's not too many places that do actual green, because actual green burial, there's no body prep work to make it a true burial, green burial. The grave has to be hand dug. There's one cemetery in town that has a portion of it it's called the preserve. That's where they do the natural or the green burials. I've heard that they are not digging the grave by hand anymore. Now, I don't know how true that is, but that takes away from the true green burial. Okay. You don't have to have a casket. You got to have some kind of container. You're not buried as deep as a casketed one. And you don't have to have a vault. The cemetery, in order to be designated as a green cemetery, in Indiana, I'm not sure about all states have the same, but in Indiana, the requirement is that you have to leave all the natural grasses, which natural weeds and wildflowers and everything. You can't spray it and have it nice and neat and clean and green and everything. You cannot have a regular monument. You can have a rock placed where your body was buried. So there's a lot of things that go into that. So like I said, there's only one green cemetery in Lafayette, and that's the preserve. And so a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people think that it's cheaper for green, but it's really not, because if it's a true green and they have to dig that grave by hand, that gets costly. Yes.
When you go to a viewing, you often see these really elaborate caskets
Mhm.
that look like they would never decompose.
True.
So is that what the body is buried in, or are those just like for display?
No, they're buried in it. They're buried in it. Yeah. So there are some caskets, copper, bronze caskets, they'll be around forever. They will not. But all the cemeteries around here, and most of them across the United States, requires an outer burial container, which is called a vault. They're concrete, and just like a vehicle, whatever model, if you get more bells and whistles on it, you pay more money for it. So there's a basic concrete box that's called a grave liner. That's your least expensive, and you meet the requirements of the cemetery that you have to have that outer burial container. But if you want something that's going to be maybe thicker concrete, have a liner, be reinforced with steel within the concrete, the price goes up on those particular containers. Excuse me. So with the caskets, yeah, copper, bronze will be around forever, probably stainless steel. But then your regular steel caskets, once that vault that the casket's placed in the ground, once that starts to crumble, deteriorate, because concrete, it's porous, so it's going to deteriorate. The liner, if it's a copper or bronze liner, that's never going to go away, and that casket and that liner is going to be there till Jesus comes. But the others, yeah, the wood caskets, they're going to deteriorate once the vault has crumbled. But again, that's a long time in the future. Some people would not buy a vault except the cemetery requires it. So they're going to use the least expensive one. Other people feel differently about it. They say, I want that body and that casket protected. I think the vault's more important because it gets the wear and tear of mowing for decades and decades, and the snow and all the water. And, we want a really good vault. We don't care about the casket. Other people are reversed. We want a nice casket, but we could care less about the vault. So I have a lady over here.
Yeah, talking about cremation, then you be buried on an existing.
That's up to the cemetery, but many cemeteries around here do allow that. Yeah. Question?
What's the purpose of the vault? I mean,
The purpose of the vault, yes, it's not what we as consumers think. It makes it easier for the cemetery to maintain the property. Because if you put a regular steel or a wood casket in the ground, I'm sure all of you have seen cemeteries that are and the stones are all like this. Used to be, it was a choice whether you had a vault. That vault, that concrete lasts long enough that the earth gets built up around it and it gets firm. So again, that vault's going to be there a long time. If it's just a casket in there, it could deteriorate and the ground sinks. So it's not to protect that casket. It's not to protect that person, that body. It's to keep the earth from caving in, so it's easier to mow and maintain. Yeah. Yeah. Done? Okay. I've been told I should be done by now, but I don't know what I've done with them since they got upset here. I always like to leave a nice little, yeah.
So suppose I want to be cremated. The regulations.
There aren't, except you probably need to talk to the priest about that. No, you may, there's really not too many regulations as far as what you do with cremains or when. Most of the time, a cemetery, especially if it has an office on the property, A cemetery will not let you scatter them over an already used grave, not bury, but just scatter. But a lot of times you can scatter. Smaller cemeteries, they don't care. So, yeah. So anyway, I was talking about age a while ago. Don't worry about getting older. You still get to do stupid things, only slower. Okay, and so I kind of like to, when I, yes.
And is there any?
Some cemeteries do require what's called an urn vault. Yes, they do. It's, you can use the regular little cardboard box that the cremains are put in, but you have to have an urn vault, with the exception if you use an urn that's the cultured marble, then you don't have to buy an urn vault. Those cemeteries will allow that cultured marble urn. So, yeah. So, but that's a cemetery requirement, just like a burial vault. So,
Okay, and then. So how do you arrange the cemetery? Or just remain?
some cemeteries have an area now where they just, you buy a smaller piece of land for cremains. A lot of times if both the spouses are both going to be cremated and buried, you can be buried in one space, and that's a cemetery. You know, it's what they allow. So anyway,
Okay.
do we?
No.
Oh.
The church,
I know I
it
told
really
you.
should
Maybe you
be
gotta let him.
either a cemetery or a columbarium or, you know, someplace, because that's showing respect to what was a human body.
Okay, but my kids are gonna.
No.
Well, not through the church, but legally you can scatter anywhere. If you bury them in your yard, in your flower garden, then you have to have what's called a burial transit permit, which you would get when we give you the cremains. And then you have to have that available for a future owner of that land and say, we buried this little box down here 30 years ago. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna have to cut it off because the second fiddle said it's time.
Now, Kate, will you remain here for questions
Okay,
afterwards?
sure.
Okay, thank you. Let's give it a big hand.
I just now knocked it off. So sorry.
All right. Take care. You
Good till the very end.
did great.
There we go. I'm so sorry.
Okay,
I took your time.
no, I was only planning on thinking of anything, but I was planning for you to have most of the time.
Well, as I told her, there's always so many questions. They can go on for hours. Thank you.
Did you learn something tonight? We've asked Father Steve to give us some a Catholic perspective on the process of burial, funeral, and so we're going to let him take it from here.
And, you know, basically most of the questions come about through cremation. And this is just the introduction when this all came about. And I thought it's very good. And I would just start with that. The Christian faithful are unequivocally confronted by the mystery of life and death when they are faced with the presence of the body of one who has died. Moreover, the body which lies in death naturally recalls the personal story of faith, the loving family bonds, the friendships, and the words and acts of kindness of the deceased person. Indeed, the human body is inextricably associated with the human person, which acts and is experienced by others through that body. It is the body whose hands clothe the poor and embrace the sorrowing. The body of a deceased Catholic Christian is also the body once washed in baptism, anointed with the oil of salvation, and fed with the bread of life. Thus, The church's reverence for the sacredness of the human body grows out of a reverence and concern, both natural and supernatural, for the human person. The body of the deceased brings forcefully to mind the church's conviction that the human body is in Christ, a temple of the Holy Spirit, and is destined for future glory at the resurrection of the dead. The conviction and faith finds its expression in a sustained and insistent prayer that commends the deceased person to God's merciful care so that his or her place in the communion of the just may be assured. A further expression is the care traditionally taken to prepare the bodies of the deceased for a burial that befits their dignity and expectation of their final resurrection in the Lord. Although the cremation is now permitted by the church, it does not enjoy the same value as the burial of a body. In fact, the church's preferred way of doing a cremation is that with just a little bit extra, you can actually rent a basic coffin casket, have the full funeral, then have the cremation, and then the interment of the cremains at a later date. That's the preferred Catholic way. You can, Kay, I'm sure, has done it before. You can rent a casket for a funeral, then have the body cremated and put into an urn. So the church clearly prefers and urges that the body of the deceased be present for the funeral rites. You can do more. The funeral in the presence of cremains is abbreviated. There are some things that you cannot do, since the presence of the human body better expresses the values which the church affirms in those rites. And so that's why you can't just, scatter them. You have to inter them. In most states and most cemeteries, you can put at least one urn on top of a casket already. And some you can actually put one at the foot and one at the head. That varies by state laws and regulations as well as cemetery rules. But you can, in some places, I've never heard of any place where you cannot put at least one urn on top of a casket. And in some places you can do two, or there are what are called columbariums. The basically columns. Sometimes churches will have one. It's like a little, like mailbox, a little bit bigger. And then, the urns are put in there and the name plates are put on with the date of death. So they don't actually have to go into the ground. They can go into what is called a columbarium, which is kind of and there are some churches, actually, the church that I was pastor up in Columbia recently put a columbarium outside the church. And so it's basically just like a big mailbox for urns. And I'm sure there are cemeteries around here that have them, right? Are there columbariums in some of the cemeteries around here? Yeah. I haven't, we don't do many funerals here, so I haven't been to any of the cemeteries, but I would assume that more and more of them are, because it actually helps preserve, some of the land, and it's easier for them. And they're even actually making bigger ones and sliding whole caskets into, vaults like an apartment cemetery. If you kind of want to, kind of put that with the nameplates and stuff on it. So I'm sure there's those here in town too, correct?
Lots of years do have a fair in there. It's kind of a mini
It's like a monument, a shrine, and then there are spaces in there for urns and for nameplates, so that somebody wants to know where is grandma, grandpa. Well, they're here, and here's the dates. You can still get the little if you want to do like an etching, like sometimes some people do, but it's out of that humanness and that respect for the body that the Catholic rules are what they are, that they have to be. You can be cremated, like I said. The preferred way is to actually rent a casket, have a full funeral, and then have the cremation, and then inter the cremains, which doesn't, like I said, have to go into the ground. It can go into a columbarium, but it should be respectfully interred, and it should not sit on the mantle for like years and years. We're actually it's gonna be like a delayed period of time. The best is to just leave it in the hands of the funeral home, and in some places in the country with, winter and weather, you just have to leave even full caskets. As I talking to Brent, he said, well, yeah, there's a lot of funeral homes that just over the winter, they just kind of have to collect caskets and have to wait until the ground, unfreezes. And then usually there's big deluges of rain. And so they don't know exactly when they can get to them. So they sometimes pile up over the winter in the funeral homes. They have a little bit harsher climate in Maine than we do here, but you can understand that. So they don't know, but then they do, inter them. So that's basically kind of what I wanted to say, and just kind of, point out that the preferred Catholic mission of cremains is to spend the extra little bit, rent the casket, have the full funeral, and then the cremation, and then have the interment of the cremains, whether it's, on top of a family, vault where, great grandma or grandpa was, or into a columbarium or to a mausoleum, but they are, respectfully, and so that future members of the family can kind of know and oh, these are where our ancestors go. Not just, oh, and some, dirt in these woods and the trail 501 at point, B, 200 feet.
In every country, even where land is so limited.
Well, in basically in Europe, oftentimes the bones are just kind of put in, and then at a certain point in time they're just kind of shoved into. But then they are in cemeteries and or churches. Is that what you're talking about?
We were walking through a cemetery that was connected to a monastery in Italy, and they said because space is so limited that they will, within, I think it was 7 years, they will see if the body, with a family member present, see if the body is adequately decomposed. If not, put it back in for another 3 years, and then open it again, and then reuse that space.
Yeah, but basically there's usually a spot behind us. They just push it back, and yeah, and actually there's a lot of like medieval, in monasteries, and in fact some of them you can actually have. They have tours of some of them. They go way back.
Okay.
Okay.
Are there more questions? Kay is still available.
If like I and I just, we drive body of the family. I feel like this, is there some rule against that?
No, as long as the remains are respectfully, taken care of and interred. No, that actually, the church has been, the forefront of science. If you want to, but yes, but the church would want then whatever is left to be respectfully, probably would be, cremated. I don't think you'd want to have a viewing of a dissected body.
Okay.
Donate your body. A lot of people, you bequeath your body, but paperwork and everything, that still does not mean that they will accept.
Right, when people say, oh, I'm donating my, really, there's no, it's really the only place that I know of any place that actually uses body, sometimes has, is anatomy for physicians. I have no idea about that. I can speak to that. And there's always been, well, there won't be, but the last time I did that, they said, well, maybe in the future, but you, this is specific place
That's why you want a backup plan. And people over the years. But they also set up prepaid information. That way if they don't need it, then they get it come back. Pleasant. But it does take a year to get information back.
And the other thing, you know, whatever you die of, enough with your body. And more for the spirit to learn, you know. So, well, okay, so some people who die in a heart attack, that body may not, they may not be able to use that because for medical students.
Okay, other questions? Has this been a fairly productive session tonight in terms of learning? I think everybody learned something. And thank you so much, Kay, for preparing to come over. And thank you, Father Steve.
You're welcome.
For helping us to learn more about our faith and the rules. Good. All right. Next week, we're going to have a session on financial procedures.
Yeah, additional financial information that we may not have covered yet.
Okay, and then the session after that will be the one where we have two women come in and talk about how to downsize. And that, I'm going to have to miss both of those. That's the one I really wanted to see. So I hope that they get it nicely recorded.
They come in and do it.
No, but they probably know companies that will.
And then the last session will be to address any additional questions that you have, any aspect. So we'll try to address those questions. We'll give you opportunities beforehand to submit those questions, the things that you think we need to cover. If people need help with some of the tutorials or the items that we talked about in session 2, we'll be available to help you with that, to get those templates downloaded and be able to use it. Wendell is going to redo the session. We couldn't recover it practically. So what we're going to do is redo the session and make it available on for the cake program. So,
Right. And you're all required to be.
Yeah.
I want the YouTube videos to be ready.
I suspect that depends now on Mary King, but I'm going to get the first 3 out to her probably this weekend. Okay. Yeah. Other questions, comments? Thank you for your patience with our lousy technology here, but we're trying. Take care. Have a good evening. See you next week. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yep.
So, you mentioned thing that where you fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
All the different, what's that called?
It's called a template.
So, I know this. I looked that over briefly and I thought, ooh, is that everything? I'm gonna say that. I think I should.
Okay, let me turn this off. All right, and we'll take care of it.
Okay, great.
Couple of people that say this. Well, last week, yes. Yeah, and I don't have it. I mean, I have it, but I don't have it. Check with Bill Strasberg and see if he has one from last week. Okay. Okay.
All these weeks have been very helpful. I I mean, I always think on stuff like this, if you learn one thing, you're one thing better.
Yeah,
That's
let
for
me stop
sure.
the recording.